All right, Jason, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Raj. It's an absolute pleasure to be with everybody this afternoon, and a terrific honor to be able to be talking with everybody today on this topic of Rocky Mountain natural gas production and a new hydrogen economy. Again, my name is Jason Sandel, and I'm located in Aztec, New Mexico. And so it's just an absolute pleasure to be with everybody today. Start off by talking a little bit about me and my passion and my desire for energy advocacy. Our business is a drilling and well servicing contractor. So the way to think about that is that we dig the holes in the ground to deliver hydrocarbons, and then as those wells age and get scale or sand or some other problem that's developed with them, then we'll go and clean them out. So the way to think about me is I'm a shovel and a plumber, is the best way to really think about it. And as Raj said, I'm a former Farmington City Councilor. I was a member of the NewMexico Methane Advisory Panel, a convener for the New Mexico Energy Transition Act Community Advisory Commission, an advisor to the Roosevelt Project. It's my understanding that Melanie Kinderdine did the first of these seminars, and definitely a tough act to follow. She's a consummate professional and extraordinarily knowledgeable on these topics. I'm New Mexico's representative to Western States and Tribal Nations, which is a topic that we'll review today, and a member of the Economic Recovery Council here in New Mexico, dealing with business reactions to COVID shutdown, particularly focused on COVID safe practices for the operation of businesses, and NMOGA chair-elect. And then finally, a hydrogen roundtable organizer for the state of New Mexico. And really all of those things, while there's a long list of them, it's really about care and love for our community. And my message today is about the reality that a low or no carbon transition is highly unlikely, if not impossible, without some sort of a fuel, and that it must go beyond electricity. And as a proud energy exporter who has historically powered the Western United States, my message is that our community here in the Four Corners, our community is up to the challenge and ripe for investment. And while I speak specifically about the San Juan Basin and the community in which I live, I'll venture to say that the comments that I'll be making today really apply to so many natural gas producing communities and coal producing communities across the Rocky Mountains and the Intermountain West. So our business was founded by a gentleman by the name of Bum Gibbons when he moved to the San Juan Basin in 1953. An extraordinary man. He was really considered by most as the original kind of service company tycoon, if you will, where he owned well servicing yards all across Texas and moved up into the San Juan Basin. And then as he did not have any heirs that wanted to take over their businesses, Mr. Gibbons then sold each of his yards to his area foreman. And my grandfather was fortunate enough to be one of his area foremen, where we purchased the business from him in 1963. And so here today in 2021, I am now the third generation of my family to own and operate this drilling and well servicing business. And a message behind the business in which we operate is that natural gas production isn't about big oil. It's not about towers in downtown Houston. It's about a local energy economy. It's about the people who work for me day in and day out to deliver energy for America's future. And oftentimes it's the men and women of the industry who take time away from their families, answer every beck and call, and risk life and limb such that people across the world can drive their cars, heat their houses, and turn on their lights. For every lease explored, every well drilled, every barrel or cubic foot produced, there is a roustabout, a truck driver, and a floor hand. And I definitely want to just, at the onset of this conversation, I want to take a quick moment to reflect on all of these people over all of the years who make today possible, and just say thank you to those folks. Oftentimes, our industry is one that is beat upon and frowned upon instead of appreciated. And through all of COVID and through all of the trials and tribulations, we've been out there working. And so take a moment and think about these men and women who deliver energy on behalf of our nation and on behalf of our globe. And please share with me appreciation for their hard work and dedication. I then want to talk a little bit about the experience in a natural gas producing basin, specifically the San Juan, but our experience isn't much different than Green River or Vernal or any other area, where in October of 2008, following the global economic crisis, natural gas prices collapsed from above $10 to below $2. In fact, Farmington, New Mexico was ranked in 2016 as one of America's fastest shrinking cities. Our population at that time had shrank by 8.8% from 2011 to 2016, faster than any other metro in the country. Just think about a community with such a mass exodus, all based upon commodity prices collapsing in 2008. The result of that is a massive decline in the health and wealth of our community since the global economic crisis in 2008. It is in both tribal and non-tribal communities and amongst union and non-union laborers. It's prolific. We worry about it day and night, and our community needs hope. We are collectively the definition of an economically, socially, and racially disadvantaged community. We need to make sure that we're not turning our back on those in need, whether it be in the San Juan Basin, the Uinta, or beyond across the Rocky Mountains. Just recently, we celebrated the 100-year anniversary of the first well drilled in the San Juan Basin. And I reflect back to that first well that was drilled in 1921, nearly across the street from where I sit right now. And I think to myself, okay, now it's 1921 and we have natural gas. Now what? Well, in 1921, there was a pipeline that was built from that well to the neighboring city of Aztec. I would venture to say it's about a 2-mile long stretch. And the first natural gas was marketed in the state of New Mexico. Oil was discovered in 1922, triggering a flurry of exploration that continued throughout the 20s. Okay, now we have oil and gas. Now what? Well, the now what is that we had to find a market. We couldn't just have the product. At first, a pipeline to Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And then eventually in 1951, a pipeline from the San Juan to California. My point is that finding a market for the product seems to be the story for 100 years of development in the San Juan. And our experience isn't any different than it has been across the Intermountain West. And we find ourselves in a very similar situation today. Enter my participation with Western states and tribal nations. Western states and tribal nations is a unique, bipartisan, transnational initiative led by sovereign tribal nations, states, and counties focused on creating rural economic development, advancing tribal self-determination, and reducing global emissions through the export of clean natural gas from Western North American basins to international markets. The picture that you see over on the right side of the screen is a depiction of the producing basins across the Intermountain West. These areas produce 12.5 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. Unless we are able to find alternative uses, increase demand, or a new market, the likelihood is that the natural gas that is produced in these basins will become stranded. And stranded for what? For other energy sources that are perhaps not as clean, or even countries selecting energy sources from other countries that don't produce it to the same stringent standards that we do here in the United States. And so Western States and Tribal Nations was formed as a coalition of states and tribes coming together to identify where it is that we can export North American natural gas to clean up and reduce global emissions based upon the product that we can deliver. Our advantages are that we have ample supply. We have existing pipeline right-of-ways and bonding authorities. We have a reduced geopolitical risk exporting LNG off the west coast of the United States or North America without having to go through shipping channels. And we've been able to prove that using Rocky Mountain natural gas to produce electricity in Asia, we can prove out or have proven out a life cycle greenhouse gas emission reduction of 40% versus coal power production in Asia. So it's unequivocally proven out in a peer-reviewed study that North American Rocky Mountain natural gas is a benefit to reducing global emissions. It became very obvious to us as we began to have conversations with exporters of LNG that American or North American natural gas had to step up our game as it relates to the production of our gas. But before I get to that, I want to emphasize that we have people that care, people that want to work, and a resource worth developing. But just as always, we need a market. We need demand, and we need a way to get to market. For all of this, I say that the San Juan Basin, indeed all of the Rocky Mountain producing basins, is on the precipice of being totally stranded or taking strong action and unlocking a new global market, just as a pipeline to California did for us in 1951. But what has become clear in this endeavor to assist with the export of Rocky Mountain natural gas through LNG and working with our partners is that experts across the globe acknowledge that energy transition to a low or no carbon society is impossible without a fuel. And from where I sit today, natural gas is that fuel. But also from where I sit today, I acknowledge that our industry is going to have to say what we do what we say, and prove it as it relates to a responsibly sourced fuel. Who knew that at the end of 2020, the French government would step in and block a $7 billion 20-year LNG import agreement from the Permian Basin to the European Union because the LNG would be too carbon intensive? In their words, dirty. This, all the while, Permian methane emissions per unit of production are less than any of the other key basins across the United States. Western states and tribal nations then very actively became involved with working on certification, responsibly sourced gas certification, to open up markets for the gas that we know will reduce global emissions. And I predict that certified, responsibly produced natural gas will become the standard rather than the exception in just a few short years. And those with the certification will receive preference and a premium for their product. In fact, the likelihood is that without the good housekeeping seal of approval, our gas will quickly become stranded in favor of another area. So we ask, what is responsibly sourced gas? It's gas that takes into account the social impacts and community development, indigenous people's rights, the mitigation of land restoration and waste management, tracking freshwater usage, and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in the air. You know, our future is going to be built upon a strong foundation with a willingness to innovate. And innovation is right before us in the opportunities contained in the American Jobs Plan. The investment contained in the President's Infrastructure Investment Package is the type of hope that we are starving for when looking to the future of energy development. Western states and tribal nations is no longer simply focused on LNG exports, but now how can we deliver innovation for energy developed and produced for the United States? According to the Hydrogen Council, as of January 2020, 18 governments whose economies account for more than 70% of global GDP have developed hydrogen national strategies. Reputable hydrogen market valuation estimates indicating annual market size up to 11.7 trillion by the year 2050 have been published. And many recent at-scale project announcements validate the significant growth trajectory. The American Jobs Plan has $8 billion for hydrogen hubs and nearly another $1.5 billion for carbon sequestration demonstration projects. Why in the world would we turn our backs on the hope that's being offered for our communities? Instead, we need to find ways to put our fuel to work. Enter clean hydrogen. Time to evaluate projects based upon their carbon intensity is now. This evaluation is based upon the entire value chain rather than focusing on the source or the feedstock or the color of hydrogen. Just the other day, on Monday, New Mexico's Governor Lujan Grisham released her discussion draft for the Hydrogen Hub Act, which she'll be promoting in the 2022 legislative session. And it is precisely this concept of clean hydrogen, rather than some color of hydrogen, that is outlined in her proposal. Her proposal starts with a standard of 9 kilograms per carbon equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen in 2022, scaling back to 3 kilograms in 2028. In addition, the administration in the state of New Mexico is covering upstream life cycle emissions through the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department and the Environment Department and their methane capture rules. What is recognized in New Mexico and in other areas, whether it be operators specifically in Wyoming or methane rules in Colorado, or these rules that are coming into effect in the state of New Mexico, is that responsibly producing natural gas and the clean hydrogen that can be developed from it are going to be the standard rather than the exception. In addition, it's critical for us to keep in mind energy justice. The Energy Department, the United States Energy Department, says for far too long, communities of color and low-income communities have borne the brunt of pollution to the air, water, and soil they rely on to live and raise their families. The clean energy revolution must lift up these communities that have been left behind and make sure those who have suffered the most are the first to benefit. I wish I could take that quote and just put it as part of the entire presentation that I'm putting forth to you all today, because that it is exactly the point that I am trying to make by talking about the pain that this community, the San Juan Basin, and other communities that are exactly like it across the Rocky Mountains have felt since the crash of commodity prices in 2008. The Institute for Energy Justice says energy justice refers to the goal of achieving equity in both social and economic participation in the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those disproportionately harmed by the energy system. So NewMexico's proposal and the Hydrogen Hub Act that's just been released is that qualifying hydrogen projects must create opportunities to employ workers from disproportionately impacted communities according to the NewMexico Sustainable Economy Task Force. This is a task force that was authorized according to state statute that has been looking at sustainable economies and diversification in the state of New Mexico. And hydrogen projects must take into account the recommendations from that Sustainable Economy Task Force. So in looking at the advantages that come from the Rocky Mountains and how we can play into a hydrogen economy, is that the Rocky Mountain and the producing basins in the Rocky Mountains are at an intersection with an emerging CO2 economy. Not only just carbon capture and underground storage, but utilizing carbon in a variety of different beneficial uses, which will create a whole new economy based upon the carbon which we were capturing. Further, the region provides an opportunity to help President Biden's administration meet their environmental justice and tribal community energy transition goals. Employees displaced from the coal and oil and gas industry can help build a new clean hydrogen economy in the Southwest. Institutions and universities have a long history of working with the national labs, which we're so proud to have in the state of New Mexico, including on all hydrogen issues, as evidenced by BioTech's spin out from Sandia National Labs to commercialize clean hydrogen technology. In addition, New Mexico, Wyoming, other states have existing financing mechanisms in state law where state and federal highway funding can be bonded for transportation systems, specifically pipelines, as a financing securitization methodology. In New Mexico, and I know other states as well, has a strong base of infrastructure and state policy support that can support cost-effective, low-carbon, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, clean hydrogen immediately. As I just said, New Mexico has the renewable energy resources and the state policy support to support green hydrogen production as well, all with the concept of clean hydrogen across the entire value chain. So in looking at our path forward, relating to looking to the future, which is what the theme was of our 100-year anniversary of the first natural gas well drilled here in the San Juan Basin. Future, frankly, is staring us in the eyes. Hydrogen projects are being suggested all across the West. This group of folks coming together and having a conversation about development of energy resources from Wyoming to New Mexico and including Arizona, it is proof of projects and innovation that's being considered. There are carbon capture projects being proven out and alternative and revitalized uses for carbon. Further, reducing methane emissions, whether it be through an EPA rule, New Mexico rules, or individual companies wanting to certify their gas for their own commercial reasons. These opportunities rest with us today, with communities, with the workers inside of those communities, with the operating companies, with NGOs, with government partners, with private businesses that want to invest in a new hydrogen economy. And the question before us simply is, if we're going to be happy with that single sales outlet to Aztec, as what we had in 1921 from that first well, or if we're going to be happy with just keeping the status quo with a pipeline to California that was built in 1951, or if we as an energy group of states, energy producing group of states, if we're going to grasp this national and international market that is before us today in 2021. And I am one that believes, why would we turn our head to the challenge before us? When looking at some of the obstacles that we have to really becoming a powerhouse, no pun intended, but a powerhouse for hydrogen development in the West to markets on the West Coast and others, there are some challenges. Our transportation infrastructure, our energy transportation infrastructure, electric grid capacity and pipeline capacity and rail access being in the right places are challenged. We also need to be thinking about scalable commercialization. Get what, to whom, for what, in sufficient scale to justify developing the source. And then also really keeping in mind, and I think that this is a very important point, particularly for this group of folks, on the interface between research and development and deployment. We don't have 20 years to study. We need to be on the forefront of deployment and getting to the point where we can provide hydrogen power in whatever format sooner rather than later. And then in thinking about the broader scope of the purpose of iWest, and thinking about the American Jobs Act that's been passed and the enormous investment that's going to be made both by the federal government and state governments, private businesses across the United States, really thinking about project and financial management. And is it right for, or is it possible for one state to go at it alone? Or is it that we need to be thinking about how we can work together? And if we work together, how is it that we can provide that fiduciary responsibility in a way that treats all of the states equally, and where they can work together and deploy rather than just study? To this point, I look at the Western Governors Association. They have a policy resolution that was passed in 2018. And it's entitled Energy in the West. And I've selected just one goal and a couple of objectives that come from that document, which I think is a critical document as we're confronted with Western states and particularly the Rocky Mountains and the Intermountain West on what our role is in the future of energy development and energy export on behalf of our country and the globe. And looking at goal number 4 inside of this policy resolution, it states that the governors should advance efficient environmental review, siting, and permitting processes that facilitate energy development and the improvement in the construction of the necessary electric grid, both transmission and distribution, as well as pipeline infrastructure, while ensuring environmental and natural resource protection. These are the considerations that NewMexico has been asked for as we pursue the development of a hydrogen hub, and I think are critical for other states to be thinking about as they pursue the same. A couple of the objectives that are identified inside of this document: Objective 5, encouraging regional transmission planning organizations to to conduct interconnection-wide planning with the full participation of the states and with consideration of state energy policies. Objective 6, creating functional partnerships among states, federal agencies, tribal governments, and local jurisdictions to solve conflicts that hinder energy infrastructure and resource development. I really want, just from a very personal standpoint, want to express my support. The chairman of the Navajo Resource Development Committee, Chairman Nez, offered testimony before Congress that made very clear that Native American tribes and nations must have a seat at the table in all conversations relating to the development of state energy policies, federal energy policies, and what the future of energy and resource development looks like in the United States. And then finally, Objective 7, increasing cooperation on interstate projects through interstate compacts and other tools. As we're facing or gratefully accepting the opportunity for some of these infrastructure funds that are going to be allocated through the American Jobs Plan, really looking at how states work together is a very interesting and important conversation for us to be working on. How is the money going to be drawn down? And are we going to simply try and get what's ours from one state or one basin or one tribe and close the opportunity to be working with others? Or are we going to open up and discuss a system for energy export and development that will guide the United States and others for decades to come? Upon the passage of NewMexico's Energy Transition Act, our governor said this: "This is a really big deal. The Energy Transition Act fundamentally changes the dynamic in New Mexico. This legislation is a promise to future generations of New Mexicans who will benefit from both a cleaner environment and a more robust energy economy with exciting career and job opportunities. Crucially, the Energy Transition Act does not leave affected workers and neighbors behind. We look out for each other. With this law, we seal that promise." And I take that quote offered by our Governor Lujan Grisham and think that her heart is in the exact same place as we are considering the development of a hydrogen hub in New Mexico, in the Four Corners, in partnership with others to deliver for a new hydrogen economy. With that, I just want to say thank you for your attention today. And my email address, I've developed an email address so that I can keep hydrogen comments and energy comments separate from the work that I'm doing being a shovel and a plumber. And my email address is nmenergyprosperity@gmail.com. And I really welcome folks' ideas, willingness to work together, and as well as any sort of criticism that folks have. As I'm one person that's offering thoughts and thinking about how it is that we can provide hope for our community and for the people that live within it, whether it be the San Juan Basin or any of the other coal and natural gas producing basins across the Rocky Mountains. So with that, Raj, I'll turn it back over to you and just say thank you very much.
Oh, I think you muted yourself. Jason, you muted yourself. So, but thank you, Jason. with that, I would open it up for questions. You can either raise your hand or submit the questions through the chat. Already have one question here from Alan Krupnik in the chat box, and his question is, what current or planned policies are most important to facilitate this transition, or alternatively could be hindering it and the transition to the
Sure.
economy?
Yeah. From my perspective, I think that it's important for us to be looking at a certification process for the development of natural resources, fossil fuels. So really kind of looking at that supply chain and making sure that we're dealing or addressing concerns in the development of fossil fuels. Secondarily, I think that we need to be looking at the carbon intensity of how hydrogen is produced. And then I think that we need to be looking at energy justice, and then finally commercialization. I mean, those 4 points for me are of critical path for industry as well as policymakers to be to answering those questions.
So I have a follow-on on that, and so this, the whole hydrogen economy is developing so fast. Before we, open our eyes, it's gone, quite ahead. So do you think there is time to develop and implement these policies for them to be effective, or would the policies be, in pretty much catch-up mode?
Raj, from my perspective, we've been given a challenge to move forward. The United States federal government, Congress, and our president has asked for us to push forward and has invested in us moving forward. And it's up to us to accept that challenge and make it happen.
Okay. I had another question, and this is kind of building off of what you were talking about in terms of not just the 2008 commodities price crash, but also the cycles that fossil industry has gone through. Given that now you're kind of talking about another commodity, and given that as you said, 11 trillion or so dollar projected market, 18 countries already have strategies developed, national strategies developed. Guess what? The market is going to be flooded with hydrogen pretty soon, and we might be in the same kind of scenarios where commodity prices shocks are going to be maybe or should be expected. So how would you build off of the lessons of the shocks of the past to kind of deal with those better?
Sure. Not being an economist, an opinion on that is a national energy strategy in addressing the production and consumption and leveling out demand to the greatest extent possible is what I see as the beginning of that conversation. Because we go through boom and bust, and it's really related to any number of different market forces that would be its own seminar that you could offer, Raj, to be real honest with you. But I would come back to having a national energy policy, and then an energy policy for the Western United States collectively.
All right, I see a few hands raised. Go down alphabetical order. Sorry, I don't know who raised in what order. So George, you have a question. Crystal, is everyone unmuted now? Thank you. Go ahead, George.
Great. Thanks, Raj. Hi, Jason. Thanks very much for that nice seminar on pivoting from the past to the future. And I guess I want to ask you a question, returning back to the concept of responsibly sourced gas and thinking about what you all have been thinking along those lines. And there's sort of a simple question up front and then maybe a more involved question that following that. And the simple question is, do you foresee the responsibly sourced gas fitting into the carbon intensity strategy that's being unfolded in New Mexico for hydrogen? In other words, that it ties back to not just the emissions from the production and capturing that CO2, but perhaps goes back even further. And the more involved question is, in the context of responsibly sourced gas, one of your circles, of course, was reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, in particular, what you see as some of the technical hurdles or technical needs that are still out there that could help move down the path of responsibly sourced gas.
Sure. So I'll take the last piece of that first, George. First off, great to see you, and thank you very much for asking me to present today. And one of the major takeaways that I had from the work that I did with the Methane Advisory Panel in the state of New Mexico was really thinking about infrastructure. And as wells are developed or a new lease is developed, there are a host of problems that are confronted by operating companies, from permitting and land access, et cetera, that contribute to a variety of different complications. And so for me, it's different agencies working together to facilitate operators building out a plan and then accomplishing the goals that are established according to the plan. There are some other remediation efforts that can be put into place. I personally was advocating that in addition to the funding that was provided for plugging and abandonment of wells in the American Infrastructure Plan, that additional funding could be made available for operating companies, perhaps those that are now defunct, to improve their remediation. And so I see some opportunities that exist in that space to reduce emissions and increase capture. Back to responsibly sourced gas, there are a couple of private entities that are promoting certification, and then Western States and Tribal Nations has actually put forth a proposal with San Juan College on developing a real similar certification process. And one of the conversations that's out there around certification is it going to be good enough to be driven through private industry, through a private company offering that certification, or do we need to create a larger standard? And I think that the jury is still out on that. But certainly having the conversation and bringing people together, and instead of just simply sticking our head in the sand and saying we're not going to produce, instead changing that conversation to how are we going to most responsibly produce, I think provides dividends moving forward. So I hope I answered your questions there, George.
You did. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jason. So there are a number of questions in the chat as well. I will go with the hands raised first. So Alan Krupnik has another question. Alan? Or was the same question?
Yeah, no, sorry. Jason, I think you didn't quite answer my question. Maybe it wasn't clear. Let's just talk about the policies, current policies that are really hindering the direction that you'd like to see the West going on hydrogen development. Is there stuff that's really in the way as you see it?
Alan, thank you for coming back and seeking clarification for that. I am not aware of anything that stands in the way. I know that there's some conversation about most appropriate regulation and other matters such as that, as well as just authority and oversight. And that's just simply from a state of New Mexico perspective. But I'm not aware of anything today that is hampering the development of hydrogen as an energy source.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Question from chat. Charles Nye from University of Wyoming. So you emphasize the carbon intensity of hydrogen rather than the color of hydrogen. Do you believe that colors, which are defined by a change in carbon intensity, such as gray SMR hydrogen versus blue CMR plus CCS hydrogen, are useful? Would it be acceptable to you to use these colors as a convenient shorthand with carbon intensity considered when making more detailed considerations of merit?
Yeah, again, I can just offer what my perception is that is being discussed from a Department of Energy perspective, where the Department of Energy is really getting away from identifying colors and really more clearly identifying what clean hydrogen is by definition, and rather than going with identifying by a color.
Yeah, and I believe EIA is also going in their energy projection models also are looking at hydrogen as hydrogen rather than with colors to make it consistent. Okay, from Mike Eisenfeld, has Hilcorp as the primary producer committed to the certified gas concept in the San Juan Basin, as far as you know?
You know, Mike, you're a good friend. I haven't had any conversations with Hilcorp, nor you know, do I really think that it's necessarily appropriate to call out one particular operator or another?
Okay. The next question from Carlisle Bigay. So the Navajo Nation is centered to this Western states hydrogen strategy. As the Navajo Nation and leadership look at efforts to responsibly transition from a coal-based economy to a new energy future, how can the Navajo Nation directly assist you with your vision for the San Juan Basin?
Carlisle, thank you very much for the question. I think, you know, at this given moment, participation, really being engaged in the conversation and providing thoughts, opinions, and guidance. Really having a seat at the table, and as we're all working together to develop a strategy, being a key leader in the development of that strategy and the implementation is what I would say.
Yeah, and he does talk about also the impact of, you know, especially the closing of the Four Corners power plant, as well as the coal mines, etc., on Navajo Nation in general. And so I guess that's, you know, similar concern that you expressed in terms of the impact of the transition on the communities and how to deal with it.
Right, absolutely, Raj, and I would stress that you know, I come from the position of you know, being in natural gas production and digging for natural gas, but the coal miners and power companies that have been dependent upon coal have very similar concerns and impacts to the communities in which they are from, and so it's a matter of all of us working together.
Okay, let's see. Are there other questions? I don't see any more hands raised, and also I believe I have addressed everyone's through the chat. I just want to make sure that no one is escaped here. Yeah, I believe pretty much most of the questions that were submitted have been answered. I'm sure others can also get in touch with you with your email address if there are further questions. So as far as, I guess, the other thing, you did mention similar impacts being felt by other communities who are fossil based and going through similar kind of transition. So as far as you personally go, have you been contacted by or are you working with other entities from the basins, from these other basins, to kind of learn from each other, share lessons, as well as developing approaches where they can benefit across these different basins? Now, you did mention about some of the organizations that are trying to take a look at that, but how actively is that been going on?
Yeah, just from an energy advocacy perspective, just an individual person, and I think I need to make that abundantly clear. I represent no formal organization. I truly am kind of a guy that's out there that cares about people and cares about my community. But as a person that is out there, that is an energy advocate, I certainly look back and look at what other states are doing. I'm looking at Wyoming and the grants that they've offered here just real recently with a lot of jealousy on looking at the prove out of those demonstration projects that have been just recently funded, and offer all kinds of accolades for them moving forward in that manner. I also had the opportunity just the other day to reach out and have a conversation with some folks from Arizona and talking about what their experience is inside of their state. And so, I'm paying attention and trying to actively engage to the best of my ability. And I think that would be my hope and my ask as a result of this seminar is if folks want to engage all the way from the Navajo Nation to the Southern Utes to the Jicarilla, to Utah, to Wyoming, whoever wants to engage with just somebody that really cares, then I would hope that folks would take the opportunity to reach out to me.
All right. Well, on that note, we can end on the dot. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for a really insightful conversation that hopefully help others as well in terms of understanding issues that folks like you and others that are dealing with, and also kind of getting a different perspective in terms of approaches moving forward. So thank you once again, and thank you all for attending, and we can end there. Have a good Thanksgiving, by the way.
Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone.